In the gaming industry, nothing is more hit or miss than when a game series has its original development team leave the series, and then some other team takes over with the objective of continuing on the series. Sometimes it can be done well, but a lot of the times it ends up being a mess. And this has surprisingly happened to so many popular game series. It actually is insane. Now, once upon a time, this channel used to be a Halo dedicated channel. What crazy times those were. And Luke and I definitely weren't shy to voice our opinions about how Halo changed a lot from the old Bungie days into the 343 Industries days. Now 343 Industries has been rebranded to Halo Studios, but it is the same studio. Don't be confused. I mean, sure, some of the personnel has been shifted around. Some people have left. A lot of people have been laid off. But at the end of the day, it's still Microsoft execs running the show. When Bungie left Halo after Halo Reach, there was a very big shift in how Halo games would be made and how the games would be presented in the following years. Surprisingly enough, I don't actually have to say anything bad about Halo 4 here. I think the game speaks for itself, both the good and the bad. But when it comes to the core Halo games, Halo 1, Halo 2, and Halo 3, Bungie never missed. The biggest criticism like hardcore Halo fans might have towards the Halo series during the Bungie era would fall to like ODST or Halo Reach, which are spin-offs, in my opinion, amazing games, but some people are, a little more back and forth with it. But Halo 4 definitely had a large portion of the Halo fan base disappointed, I guess is the right word. I know I have this negative bias going into talking about Halo, so while talking about Halo specifically here, I want to just be objective. I don't need to talk about how I felt about things, but there was an art style change. There was a massive shift in tone with the narrative. There was a massive change to how multiplayer worked. And while there were new things introduced to Halo 4 that ultimately could have been seen as a positive to some community members, Halo 4 definitely was perceived as a give and take situation. For every cool new feature that was added, something would be taken out of Halo 4 that was a staple in previous games, like new Forge tools, but no infection mode. The Spartan Ops story mode, but no firefight. Characters actually having some interesting depth to them, but also they were sometimes written in ways that were unaligned with how the characters previously behaved. And this wasn't something that was isolated to just Halo 4. Every single Halo game that 343 Industries would work on always felt like it was made from a completely different team than the team that made the original games. And sure, to an extent, that's to be expected. But when we talk about some of the examples of game studios that have taken over series and have done a good job with it, a lot of these studios emulated what worked originally and then built off of that, not completely wiped the board and then tried to do something different. I guess Halo Infinite was close in some regards to getting the tone and feel, but 3 games later, it's a long time to finally be getting the right vibe for what Halo should be. If Halo Infinite was the first Halo game that 343 Industries ever did, and they hadn't already had 2 games that were out there, I think people would be more excited about the future, but I mean, they did drop the ball with Halo Infinite in a lot of different ways too. So I don't know. We did a whole video on controversies of Halo. If you ever wanted to just see a deep dive of everything 343 Industries has ever been criticized for, that one I'm a little more biased on, but it is a good watch. Okay, but we do have a sponsor for today's video. In real talk, Luke and I have been gaming way too late lately. We'll hop on for just one quick match and suddenly it's 3 a.m., eyes are fried, energy drink cans are stacking up, and when Luke wants to sleep like clockwork, his cat starts yowling like she's headlining a concert. I don't know. He told me sleep just wasn't happening. There was too much noise, it was too light, and he wasn't getting enough rest, and that's when he started using Manta Sleep Sound Mask. And yeah, this video is obviously sponsored by them, but he genuinely hasn't stopped talking about them since. Genuinely. He said it's the first mask that actually works, full blackout. What really sold him were the eye cups. They're fully adjustable, no pressure on your eyes, super breathable, and it actually stays on all night. He said it's pretty good. Even when he only gets a few hours, he wakes up feeling like he got a full night's sleep. And when I asked what about distractions and whatnot, he said the masks helps him block them all out. The super thin built-in Bluetooth headphones let him listen to his audiobooks all night, even when sleeping on his side. So if you game too late, live with the chaos of a pet, or just want to sleep like a functioning human again, check out Manta Sleep. Hit the link in the description for 10% off your first mask, and while you're there, take a look around. They've got a whole lineup of cool sleep gear that's kind of worth browsing. Also, you can check out our personal picks right under this video. Luke's sleep got better, so maybe we should all do the same. Now, of course, our complaints here aren't necessarily about individual developers working on a game series. We're definitely looking at big publishers that are making the decisions as to what studios take over franchises, and Microsoft doesn't necessarily have the best track record here. There's a lot of examples of Microsoft game studios with Xbox getting a studio set up for a new game series, and then the game ends up being kind of mediocre However, unless you're an OG Xbox player, a lot of people nowadays probably don't even realize that Gears of War was one of the biggest games of the early Xbox 360 days. Like, this was a massive, massive deal on a story front and on a multiplayer front. And much like how Microsoft put together 343 Industries to essentially take over the Halo franchise after Bungie left, they took another studio that they had acquired. They were like making Facebook games at one point, and then they grew that studio out and essentially made them the de facto studio for Gears of War moving forward, the Coalition. Now, Epic Games was the developer of the original Gears of War trilogy, which was pretty well received across the board, but Microsoft wanted more Gears of War games, so Gears of War Judgment would be the next Gears of War game, made still by Epic Games, but People Can Fly, another development studio, did get brought on by Epic Games to work on the game as well. And Gears of War Judgment was a spin-off game released in 2013, and while it didn't necessarily rub people too much the wrong way, it definitely seemed like a little bit of a step down from Gears of War 1, 2, and 3, but it definitely was built off of what Gears of War 3 had done and didn't necessarily completely overhaul the game as like a new entry. Surprisingly, an okay game that wasn't developed by the original team. However, Microsoft would take things a step further and full-on outright acquire the Gears of War IP from Epic Games, and then they would open up the Coalition to do the future of the series. So 3 years after Gears of War Judgment, Gears of War 4 would release, and it would take place 25 years after the events of Gears of War 3, and it was supposed to mark the beginning of a new era of Gears of War and the new storyline that would be like a sequel trilogy. And Gears of War 4 surprisingly reviewed pretty well across the board. I think over time, maybe the opinion of Gears of War 4 has soured a bit, but I don't think Gears of War 4 is anywhere near a bad game whatsoever. Just some people didn't experience it. And I think a lot of the reason why maybe Gears of War 4 isn't as popular as the other Gears of War games might not actually have to do with the fact that a different development studio, the Coalition, worked on it, but probably more so that Microsoft was just fumbling the ball hard with the Xbox brand during that time. A lot of people weren't buying the Xbox One, and they sure as hell weren't playing Gears of War 4. So a few years later, when Gears 5 would release, sales would actually be even lower than what Gears 4 managed to do. Once again, Gears 5 I don't think was necessarily awful, I guess. I don't know. We tried playing it a few years ago, and we got really, really bored really quickly. And the story at this point is just so detached from what we remembered from the old Gears of War games, or at least it felt that way early on. And then they try to tie it together, and it felt exhausting to experience, not necessarily as a bad game, but I think there was a lot of fatigue coming into the Gears of War franchise as a whole. And I don't know, they needed to change up the formula, but I don't think the Coalition failed here in the same way that I feel like 343 failed Halo. But maybe they're starting to cook now that they've been in the driver's seat of the franchise for a little while, and perhaps Gears of War E-Day will be the big turning point that brings interest to Gears of War back. Maybe it won't be like a perfect Gears of War game as good as the original trilogy, but maybe it can turn things around and people will be interested again. Also, People Can Fly, the development studio that did Gears of War Judgment, is also helping with this game too, so we'll have to see. You know, even Nintendo has messed around a bit with having other development studios take over for popular IPs. After Metroid was notably not existent on the Nintendo 64, Retro Studios, an American studio actually, was brought in to make the 5th ever Metroid game, Metroid Prime, which was a first-person shooter on the GameCube. Oh boy. It was actually a pretty good series too. They got 3 whole games out of it. It was a big shift from what Metroid was like in previous entries. And honestly, they had kind of a solid track record with 3 decent Metroid games. However, moving forward after the trilogy was complete, Nintendo decided to task Retro Games with something completely different. Instead of rebooting a series like Metroid Prime, they would be tasked at making a follow-up sequel to the Donkey Kong Country trilogy from the Super Nintendo days. You see, back in the SNES days, Rare was the company that developed the Donkey Kong Country trilogy that was pretty solid. However, during the GameCube era, Microsoft swooped in and acquired Rare outright, which meant no more Rare and no one making Donkey Kong Country games, even though Rare wasn't really doing Donkey Kong Country anymore anyways. They were making Donkey Kong 64, and I don't know if they were cooking anything for the GameCube at that point. But hey, Donkey Kong Country was a really popular series, and people obviously wanted a new entry to come back. So Retro Game Studios Studios was tasked at bringing Donkey Kong Country back for the Nintendo Wii in some way or another, and in 2010, Donkey Kong Country Returns released, and it was a pretty solid entry. And then a few years later, 2014, it'd be followed up with Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, another very great game and a challenging game too. It was a cool game, and it later got put on the Nintendo Switch. But here's where things get juicy. After the Nintendo Switch was released, Nintendo was trying to win over more people, and they announced Metroid Prime 4. This was a huge deal because Metroid had kind of been floating in limbo for the last few years. Team Ninja and Nintendo co-developed Metroid Other M, which was more of an action-adventure style game that was narrative-driven, and I mean, Nintendo put a lot of effort into it, but the game was not received very well. Then Nintendo tasked the development studio Mercury Steam to make Metroid Dread, which was a return to the side-scrolling style of Metroid games, which was pretty good, but people wanted a new Metroid Prime, that's for sure, and not Metroid Prime Federation Force, that 3DS co-op spin-off game that I don't know anyone who actually played that. But the announcement for Metroid Prime 4 came a long time ago. This was at E3 2017. It's 2025 and the game's still not out yet. What happened? Well, back when the game was first announced, it was revealed that Retro Studios was not working on Metroid Prime 4. Matter of fact, Nintendo had a different team working on it. It was reported by Eurogamer that Bandai Namco Studios was working on it, but we don't actually know for certain. What we do know is that in 2019, Nintendo announced that development of Metroid Prime 4 was restarting. Interesting. This isn't something that normally happens too often, where a game's announced and then the development studio is like, hey, we don't like it, so we're going to start it all over. But while this was, sad to have the game delayed when people were anticipating it for years at the point of the delay, it was interesting that Nintendo then announced that Retro Studios would be taking on the project. So the development studio that did the original trilogy was in fact working on the fourth entry. So yeah, maybe the game will be good when it does eventually come out. Now what's interesting is over on the PlayStation side of things, Spyro and Crash Bandicoot both kind of went through hell for a bit. The first 3 Crash Bandicoot games were all developed by Naughty Dog, and they were all received pretty well, especially for a game series that was being released pretty much yearly at that point. But after the 3rd Crash Bandicoot game was released, publishing rights would end up going to Universal Interactive, and they would bring on the development studio Traveler's Tales to make the next Crash Bandicoot game, Crash Bandicoot: The Wrath of Cortex, which first released on the PlayStation 2 but was later ported to Xbox and GameCube, marking Crash Bandicoot going multi-platform. And the reception of this was, kind of mixed. Surprisingly, for this game coming out in 2001, it seemed to recycle a lot of elements from previous Crash Bandicoot games without innovating, and mind you, before this, Crash Bandicoot on a yearly cycle under Naughty Dog was innovating their game quite a bit. Jesus, my allergies suck. I mean, the game was passable, and I'm sure some people liked it, and Universal was fine with Traveler's Tales doing more Crash Bandicoot stuff, so Crash Twinsanity would release in 2004, and while the game did see some improvements in the things that were criticized previously, there were still a lot kind of left on the table here, and there were better platformer games out there, like Jak and Daxter, for example. And while Traveler's Tales seemed to want to continue to do Crash Bandicoot stuff, Universal didn't seem to be interested, and ultimately then development for future Crash Bandicoot games would be shifted over to Radical Entertainment, and they would work on what would essentially become Crash Bandicoot 6 and 7, Crash of the Titans, and Mind Over Mutant. Now, Mind Over Mutant was the first Crash Bandicoot game to be published by Activision after Activision acquired Universal, which was already renamed to Vivendi at that point. And I mean, it did fine, I guess. It was kind of the same as before. It was like scoring 7 out of 10s. The camera was a little weird. And I think interest in Crash Bandicoot as a whole was probably declining because there was nothing like really exciting about Crash Bandicoot for a lot of entries at this point, which then resulted in Crash Bandicoot going on a hiatus all the way until years later, they decided to bring Crash Bandicoot back by putting him in Skylanders. Oh no. If you don't know what Skylanders was, it was like this toy to video game thing that was a spinoff of Spyro the Dragon. Barely. He was just in there as like the main character at the beginning, but they would call it Skylanders Spyro Adventure, but really it shouldn't count as a Spyro game. Spyro in itself had a pretty similar history to Crash Bandicoot. Insomniac Games did the first 3 games, but after they ended up leaving the series behind and Universal acquired Spyro, Universal shopped around to get a new development team, and they got Equinox Digital Entertainment to make Spyro Enter the Dragonfly. What what is that name? Isn't the dragonfly like one of our friends? Why are we entering? I don't know. The original development team went on to go and make Ratchet and Clank, so this was a fresh start, I guess, for Spyro, and the game was pretty average, actually pretty bad as far as reviews were concerned. A lot of reviewers said the game was more of a sidestep, but on the PlayStation 2, which isn't a good way to look at it. And while it was finally going multi-platform, the biggest criticism was how buggy the game actually was. So Universal would try again for another Spyro game, this time handing development over to Eurocom. Spyro: A Hero's Tale. It scored slightly better. I mean, the bar was pretty low with the previous game. There wasn't really too much new going on here. It just didn't feel like the series was moving forward, and it felt kind of brainless at times. Vivendi Universal then tried Amaze Entertainment for a DS Spyro game called Spyro Shadow Legacy. That honestly sounds like an FPS, but this game instead got a 50 out of 100 on Metacritic. So then Spyro was rebooted, this time with the development studio Chrome Studios, who apparently were with Vivendi Games, formerly Universal, trying to pitch a Crash Bandicoot game, and instead they landed the Spyro reboot. It definitely was more cinematic than before, and Elijah Wood starred in it, which... wow. The game did score better for how much at least they tried to innovate and do something new. Credit there. The gameplay was a little bit repetitive, but I'm sure some people really liked this, so I don't want to criticize it too much, even though it wasn't like amazing. There were then two sequels, Legend of Spyro: The Eternal Night and The Legend of Spyro: Dawn of the Dragon, each scoring not that great. I mean, on that last one, they even changed the development studio again to some other studio. This is really messy. And then Skylanders would launch, and they would use Spyro to kind of shoehorn that IP to the side, and Spyro would die after that. There'd be no real Spyro content for a long time. So then Skylanders launched, they did the 7-year run, Crash Bandicoot showed up. The development team behind Skylanders was Toys for Bob, and after Skylanders wrapped up, a support studio for Skylanders known as Vicarious Visions would be tasked at making a remake trilogy for Crash Bandicoot, and then Toys for Bob would be tasked at making the Switch port of that remake. Toys for Bob would also work on a Spyro Reignited trilogy, a remake of the original Spyro trilogy, the good ones. And I just want to say this, if you ever look into the development of Crash Bandicoot 4, it's actually insane how much attention to detail Toys for Bob considered in how they were going to do a new entry after years. I'm going to read you this part real quick, listen to this. Toys for Bob internally described the project as a reboot, but as they felt that the descriptor was premature, the team sought to determine their ultimate goal for the franchise. They looked upon a slew of games that fell within the spectrum of reboots and sequels to gauge the benefit and risks of each approach. After profiling players of the recent Crash Bandicoot remasters, who were primarily fans of the original trilogy between their mid-20s and early 40s, and studying the critical and commercial performance of past series titles, the team concluded that their project would be a sequel to the original trilogy targeted primarily at its fans. That's a lot of words, but it was like they were doing some deep research here on what they wanted to do moving forward. And I mean, sometimes at least that sounds like more effort than what some of these other things that just get spit out there look like. And they straight up just called it Crash Bandicoot 4. They were like, forget those games that were bad, this is the fourth one. But the good thing that worked here was that the team working on this game had experience working with Crash Bandicoot already. They worked on the original trilogy with the port. They were very hyper aware as to what made Crash Bandicoot work, what made other games like Spyro work as well, and they aimed to emulate what made the original trilogy so much fun, and then expand on it from there. The game actually scored really well. The only thing that didn't work out for it was that the sales weren't as high as maybe anyone anticipated. That's probably because the original trilogy kind of set the bar high with, nostalgia and all that, and a new game entry. There was a lot working against it. On one end of the spectrum, it's great Crash 4 happened with It's About Time, and on the other side of the spectrum, it's terrible that it happened because I think it sealed the fate of Spyro not getting a fourth game, or at least not anytime soon. Maybe one day we'll get one, hopefully, but what a wild ride, a long ride that was.
First Prey game in 2006 was made by Human Head Studios, and it was like this, unique first-person shooter with like some portal mechanics and gravity stuff. I don't know. Had an interesting setting. You get, kidnapped by aliens and stuff. And then after that was kind of successful for a game at the time, they announced Prey 2 and started production on it. There's actually some gameplay footage that they posted that you can find, and it would have been in this alien city, and they would have just evolved the whole thing. But by 2009, Prey as a franchise was actually acquired by Bethesda. Now, they were not happy with how Human Head Studios were doing their development and were progressing in development, so they cited quality standards as one of the issues that they had to eventually shut down this development, and they took it away from Human Head Studios. After that Prey 2 cancellation, the Prey IP was kind of like, existed at Bethesda somewhere. I mean, they probably forgot about it for a while. Eventually, Arcane Studios, they were already working on an unannounced sci-fi sim, and this project was then shifted into fitting the Prey IP, and then we got the 2017 Prey game. It was not really like a Prey game, and I always felt that game was kind of weak and not that great. And I don't know, as Arcane Studios the one that closed with Redfall?
Some of their offices closed, like the Austin, Texas location.
So I guess they closed down. So we'll probably not see Prey 2 once again, if there ever was any plans for it, but it's probably for the better.
Actually, I have something about Arcane right here in front of me I wanted to talk about. Wolfenstein Youngblood, I think, also should count here. The new rebooted trilogy after Bethesda acquired Wolfenstein and it was no longer with Activision. Or it's not a trilogy, right? The rebooted series that hopefully will be a trilogy with a third entry.
Eventually.
Yeah, eventually. Was developed by Machine Games. However, Wolfenstein Youngblood, which serves essentially as a story sequel or a little time jump, but the characters are coming right out of the second Wolfenstein game, was developed by Arcane Studios' office in Lyon, France. Actually in France, I looked it up, not some location in Canada. They were the team that did Dishonored. Wolfenstein Youngblood was an interesting mixed bag. It's great that there's a co-op game that's like first person and uses the Wolfenstein format. The problem is the game is like kind of thin. Like there's not a whole lot going on. It doesn't feel nearly as ambitious and exciting as Wolfenstein 2 New Colossus did. And I think that kind of backfired a bit and kind of gave people a bad taste with Wolfenstein for a while. I still hope we get another one, but yeah, it was just kind of reviewed as like a mid game. I'm a fan of any game that does co-op, so I'll give them a little credit there, but yeah. Wolfenstein Youngblood. The Fallout series is a bit interesting because it has shifted hands a few times. The original Fallout games, Fallout 1 and Fallout 2, were done by Black Isle Studio. However, Bethesda would acquire the rights to Fallout and Fallout 3 would be born. It was a pretty interesting first-person shooter, open-world game. They took the Fallout formula, they applied it to what had been working with what Bethesda had been doing with the Elder Scrolls series, and it was a whole birth of a new genre with Fallout 3. But they wanted to keep the ball rolling and keep interest up with Fallout after Fallout 3 released, but Bethesda was already working on Skyrim. They had to come up with something else, some sort of plan. So what ended up happening was after Bethesda released Fallout 3, they reached out to Obsidian Entertainment that just so happened to be founded by a bunch of former staff members from Black Isle Studio. So these people knew Fallout and the lore because a lot of the people were the people that created the original Fallout 1 and Fallout 2. So Obsidian ended up taking the engine that was used for Fallout 3, a lot of the assets from Fallout 3, and in a very short window of time, I think it was 18 months, Fallout New Vegas was born. And they had this interesting little detail in their contract, small minuscule thing, that if they wanted an extra big bonus from Bethesda, all the game had to get was an 85 or above on Metacritic, and it got an 84, so they didn't get the bonus. Honestly, when Fallout New Vegas first released, reception was kind of mixed. A lot of people did not like New Vegas compared to Fallout 3, and it didn't help. The game was incredibly buggy at launch. However, over time, Fallout New Vegas easily has kind of grown on people and has the reputation of possibly being one of the most popular Fallout games in the entire series. So, it aged like wine, and Fallout New Vegas is a pretty good game overall. So, it's interesting. I think I do remember there being a lot of talks about the state of the game at launch, so I understand why I didn't get the 85. I got an 84, but it's a little bit of like a silly anecdotal story that kind of goes down in gaming history. Let's talk about Far Cry real quick. Now, back in the day, the first Far Cry game was actually developed by Crytek before they did the whole Crysis thing. But after the first Far Cry game, Ubisoft started developing the Far Cry games on their own. Ubisoft Montreal has been involved in every Far Cry game. They did Far Cry 2, Far Cry 3, Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon, 4, Primal, 5, New Dawn, but Far Cry 6 marked a turning point, actually, where Ubisoft Montreal did not serve as the lead developer. Instead, it was shifted over to Ubisoft Toronto. I have yet to meet someone who really, really loved Far Cry 6. I feel like the consensus is it's fine. A lot of like missed potential in really doing something bombastic and huge and awesome. And it felt like they just kind of threw something out there that was passable, maybe. Luke, you and I tried playing co-op, right? What did you think of it?
I mean, we got really bored really quickly. I don't think we made it very far. And I do have to say, I always felt like they spend a lot of money on the main villain actor, and maybe that's why they didn't have a lot of money to develop the actual game, but I guess it's just speculation.
Surely an actor can't cost that much, though, right? Like, I mean, expensive, yes, but in the grand scheme of development, of a game, though?
I mean, maybe, I don't know. I wonder how much he got paid.
I just feel like a game development's like 100 million plus, and an actor would be like less than $1 million.
You know, maybe I was just looking for a reason why it's so boring. And I mean, maybe I was like, you know, if they spend all their money somewhere else, I could maybe understand it, but just kind of didn't capture us. I remember, you know, we did the beginning and then we escaped on a boat, the main island or something.
Yeah, we did that separately. It was like an hour of us playing by ourselves before we could play together.
And then we got together, went to the harbor, like started shooting stuff.
Wasn't Danny Trejo there?
Maybe, I don't know.
And he had like a crocodile or alligator or something. There was like some weird pets you could get. I don't know.
But yeah, I mean, just kind of boring. That's all. Just a little disappointing. Especially because I thought Far Cry 5 was great.
I thought it was okay. I think 6 was more boring than 5, though.
Oh yeah, for sure. And the setting wasn't as cool, I guess. I don't know.
How do you mess that up? Because, like, it's not like 5 had that crazy of a setting either. It was like, what, Montana?
Right, but the thing you're thrown into this cult was kind of interesting, I guess. And
yeah, but it was just like the majority of the scenery though was just Montana. How do you mess up a scenery if you have a bad story or a bad premise? That's what they had with 6, I think.
Yeah, just very generic. Do you think it was written by AI? By Ubisoft's Ghostwrite AI?
I don't think AI existed just yet enough. I'm sure they would have if they could, but I don't think it was around enough. Star Fox series was an interesting series. It's a series that I was a huge fan of because it was one of my first games I ever played on the Nintendo 64. But the sequel games weren't as straightforward when it came to Star Fox. Rareware was a development studio working closely with Nintendo for many years, but they were working on a separate game for the Nintendo 64 called Dinosaur Planet. During its development, I guess Nintendo stopped by and was like, yo, that character kind of looks like Fox McCloud from Star Fox 64. Why don't you guys do something? And thus, Rare somehow fell into the role of making the first sequel to Star Fox 64, Star Fox Adventures, which plays more like a Legend of Zelda game with Fox McCloud in it than an actual Star Fox game. Nonetheless, while this was an interesting shift to have a different studio work on a follow-up Star Fox game that is completely gameplay-wise void of what the original Star Fox 64 was, or the older Star Fox game before that, it wouldn't end there, because Nintendo, during the development of Star Fox Adventure, right before the release of Star Fox Adventures, which was the Dinosaur Planet project, announced that they were working on another game with Namco called Star Fox Assault and Star Fox Armada, which I don't think ever came out, but I think they were both announced around the same time. I do remember reading something about it like way back, that there were 2 Star Fox games announced, and one would be coming, I think it was like for arcades.
Sent you something.
Oh, look, Star Fox Arcade.
Probably that one, right?
It's probably this one. Maybe people were just calling it Armada back in the day, like who didn't know anything. So I guess there was something. There was another Star Fox game that was at least thought about at one point. And I guess Nintendo was doing a lot of stuff with arcades during this time, right? They had like a Mario Kart arcade game and stuff. I guess it makes sense. So the important one is that Namco was working on Star Fox Assault. Nintendo was hyped. They were going to have people at Namco who had worked on Ace Combat 2 work on this, except the game got delayed a bunch and employees got moved around, and it turned out that most of the team was the team that ended up working on the Klonoa series, not the Ace Combat series that ended up working on Star Fox Assault. Star Fox Assault was interesting when it released. I liked it a lot as a kid. I thought it was pretty fun. Other people hated it for some reason. I don't think that it deserves the hate. It was a pretty good game, a narrative adventure. It could have used more flying levels, for sure, but one of the less offensive Star Fox games. After that, Star Fox went into a tailspin. Development studios have come and gone. They had Q Games do Star Fox Command, which was actually a decent game gameplay-wise. Story-wise, oh my god, was it awful. Gameplay-wise, it was interesting. I don't know what Q Games ever ended up doing. They worked on Star Fox 64 3D. That's surprising. And they're still around. Star Fox Command was their second game ever? Okay. Star Fox Zero would have Platinum Games come on board to co-develop that alongside Nintendo. Star Fox Zero, I did not like. It doesn't take much for me to like a Star Fox game, just because I have this nostalgia from playing Star Fox 64 as a kid, one of my first games ever. But Star Fox Zero, man, controls were kind of wonky. And then on top of that, it was just a rehash of Star Fox 64, which they had just re-released on the 3DS a couple of years earlier. And it just seems like the cycle of repeating the same Star Fox story over and over again. It wasn't that great. One that I wanted to talk about a little bit that I think counts, it does count, but it's interesting because I don't think the end result was terrible, but it definitely was different and it felt really different. But Max Payne 1 and 2 were done by Remedy Entertainment but published by Rockstar. However, Max Payne 3 was actually developed by Rockstar themselves, and Remedy wasn't involved in the actual full-on development process, though they were reached out to as like an advisory role. And Max Payne 3 did have the reputation of feeling like a substantially different game experience than the previous Max Payne games. So I think that counts. Even though Max Payne 3 wasn't necessarily a bad game, there was a big tonal shift between development studios. And I am excited that Remedy is coming back to remaster Max Payne 1 or remake Max Payne 1 and Max Payne 2. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But I did want to mention Max Payne 3 in this video too.
Did you know that the beginning of Medal of Honor actually lies with Steven Spielberg and Saving Private Ryan?
I did know that.
You did know that? Okay, what about this? Did you know that the first Medal of Honor was made by DreamWorks Interactive, a joint adventure between DreamWorks and Microsoft?
I did not know that specifically.
So they made the first Medal of Honor game, and then they made, the succeeding ones. But for Medal of Honor Allied Assault, which was a sequel that came out in 2002, they hired a studio called 2015 Inc. And they made a pretty successful Medal of Honor game. The issue with this is, though, that 2015 Inc. afterwards kind of fell apart, and a lot of these developers left, and they would actually found their own studio called Infinity Ward, which you might have heard of, and then they went on to make Call of Duty, and, then Call of Duty became a massive hit. And obviously, Medal of Honor is way less popular than Call of Duty nowadays, and has been for a long time, actually, probably since 2002.
But the team that ended up leaving to make Infinity Ward and make Call of Duty ended up getting fired, or two of the leaders got fired, and then a lot of the team quit with them, and then they went on to make Respawn, and then they made Titanfall and Apex Legends.
Well, we'll get to that actually, because they did also go back to Medal of Honor, funny enough. But before they did that, the studio, DreamWorks Interactive, was actually renamed to EA Los Angeles, and then renamed once again to Danger Close Games. And then they would go back to Medal of Honor, making the reboot, the 2010 reboot, and Medal of Honor Warfighter in 2012. Now, those were kind of not that well received. People didn't really care for them. They just kind of felt like Battlefield reskins. And after that, Medal of Honor lay dormant for 8 years until they announced a VR game for 2020 that was developed by Respawn Entertainment.
Oh, full circle.
Full circle with the 2015 people. But obviously, Medal of Honor Above and Beyond was a VR title, and I don't know, I think it's really weird when big games make a VR title. Virtually every single mainline Metal Gear game was developed by Kojima Productions under Konami. This era, brought us games like Metal Gear 1, 2, Metal Gear Solid 2, 3, Peacemaker 4, Metal Gear 5, all the stuff, basically, all the Metal Gear games that as many people know, and as we've talked about in previous videos, in 2015, Hideo Kojima had a falling out with Konami higher-ups, and he left the studio after the release of Metal Gear Solid 5. And since this departure, Konami has taken a different approach on the Metal Gear franchise a couple times, specifically one notorious time when they released Metal Gear Survive in 2018, which was a survival zombie Metal Gear game, like a survival shooter. And this was made by an internal Konami studio, so it's hard to say which one it was exactly. It was made by Konami Digital Entertainment. I think they just have subsidiaries and then they make the games, but it wasn't made by Kojima Productions anymore, obviously. And this game was so badly received. People often called it one of the worst games ever. I mean, obviously it was nothing like Metal Gear, but since then they have done a little bit of better things. They released some collections. They announced a remaster for the Metal Gear Solid 3 remake that we're gonna get, called Metal Gear Solid Snake Eater. They have their internal studio develop it, but they pulled in Virtuos. Basically, they're gonna have the main Konami studio making it now and a support studio making this next game. So probably won't be as bad as Metal Gear Survive. And also, it's a remake of an already established game, so they should not mess it up too badly. But I mean, we'll see what happens of it. But I mean, it looks good from what we've seen so far. Still kind of weird that they're releasing Metal Gear games without Kojima. Silent Hill is interesting. So the development of Silent Hill was all over the place. Like the original first 4 games were developed by Team Silent Studio. The other games were all over the place. It wasn't even made by Japanese devs most of the time after that. It was just random Western studios. And then, we had that PT Silent Hill thing that was announced. It was going to be made by Kojima's studio. There was a full falling out with Konami. We talked about it a little bit earlier. After that, there was no hope for Silent Hill for a while until they started announcing these remakes. And they started with Silent Hill 2, which was a pretty great remake.
Silent Hill 2 was done by Bloober Team, which they hadn't done anything with Silent Hill before, but they are going to be working on another Silent Hill remake in the future.
Oh, isn't that the one? They announced Silent Hill 1 remake recently.
Oh, did they already announce it officially? Okay.
Yeah, it's like a couple days old, maybe like 2 weeks. They did announce that they're gonna have an original new Silent Hill coming out. It's gonna be Silent Hill F, and it's actually already releasing in September of this year. I'm very excited for it. And what they did is they hired a studio for this new game that worked on Resident Evil recently, like on the Resident Evil 2 and 3 remake, and on the multiplayer games for Resident Evil, which, you know, Resident Evil Rebirth wasn't that great, but they still worked on them. So they have some experience in the genre. They're gonna make this like reboot where it actually I think it's for the first time, or the first time I can remember, where it's not set in an American city. It's set in a small Japanese town in the 60s, which will be an interesting change of pace and everything and setting. So I'm very excited for it. Yeah.
Now, what happens when a game series is loved and then the development team leaves, a different team makes a game, and then the old team comes back to the game? We're talking about Postal. Postal was an interesting top-down shooter game originally developed by Running with Scissors. It was just like a crazy mass murder game. I don't know, it was wild. Now, the first Postal game scored like 56 out of 100. It was like a mixed bag as far as what reception looked like. Postal 2, on the other hand, actually scored pretty bad too. But people loved Postal 2. I mean, all of the controversy aside because of the high levels of violence that was in the game, it was a wild ride for a 2003 title. It made the jump to first person. I mean, it even got a crazy movie spinoff. What? I don't know. The movie starts off with a plane hijacking, so you could just see what the tone is here. It had a budget of $15 million and made $146K in the box office, and it got a 9% on Rotten Tomatoes. Sweet. There was also plans for a sequel. That never happened. Then they tried to do a Kickstarter for a sequel later on, and it got canceled because of a lack of funding. Okay. Now, after Postal 2, things got a little wacky. The development team Running with Scissors wasn't doing very well financially and ended up contracting another company called Akella, which was responsible for publishing Postal 2 in Russia, and they essentially contracted them to make the next Postal game. Running with Scissors provided some initial design concepts, but wasn't really all that involved in the actual development of the game. However, Akella ended up struggling themselves financially, and apparently they refused to give Running with Scissors access to the game's source code or access to developer tools. So Running with Scissors wasn't even able to like update the game or do patches or anything like that. They did end up releasing a Postal 3, and then Akella shut down right afterwards, and essentially the game was a pretty buggy mess. Eventually Running with Scissors just removed Postal 3 from their store altogether, but don't worry, 10 years later, Running with Scissors would come back and release Postal 4. No regrets. Finally, the team made a follow-up game to Postal 2, the game that was kind of okay, but people really liked, and it was really not good. Even then, after all of this, the game was panned for having dated jokes. The game was really buggy. The humor felt like out of place, really just trying to lean into shock value, more or less. But I think the biggest criticism was that the humor itself wasn't really like clever in any way. It just felt like they were trying to do stuff to get a rise out of people rather than, you know, do something a little bit clever. But then the gameplay itself was kind of broken, glitchy, the AI wasn't really good, the gameplay felt kind of bad, and then of course there were the glitches, performance issues, and all of that. So yeah, this is how the game's doing on Steam right now. Not the best look. I don't know. Since then, Running with Scissors has continued to release new stuff for the Postal series. They did April Fool's Postal Royale. That's called Postal Royale. It was an April Fool's joke. They did a Postal Brain Damaged game, which was developed by like another studio collaborating. And then they did a Postal 2 VR game. So yeah, I don't know. Now, obviously, we've seen the history of other studios that take over. Sometimes it works. A lot of the times it's a little subpar. But what about the future? Because we know there's a lot of sequels and other projects, reboots that are coming up that are being developed by teams that are sometimes unrelated to the original project. And this could be cool if the game ends up being good, but it also could be bad. So with that disclaimer in mind, there are some interesting games that are coming up in the future that are a little wacky with the teams that are picked or the teams that are selected to work on upcoming games.
And I guess which one you were thinking of when you said wacky?
I think I already know which one you're going to guess. But go ahead. Which one were you thinking of?
Fable?
Yeah. It's literally the one that I have on my list right now. Fable is wacky. In the past, we've been critical of like the pre-release info about Fable. And I just want to be clear here, we're not like preemptively hating on Fable, but this game that's been in the works for years now definitely falls into the stereotypical Microsoft game studio experience. It's just this thing that Microsoft does where they hype things up, show things off way too early. The game gets delayed multiple times. It takes years and years for information to come out. And then when the game does come out, a lot of the time it's not really that great of a game. So while we're not passing judgment on Fable just yet, rumors of Fable coming back to life after Lionhead Studios closed down and they had that whole project canceled. These been circling for a long time. I think 2017 was when like rumors were already gaining traction. Even Phil Spencer in 2017 was like talking about the upcoming Fable. It's 2025. And the game's only been delayed to 2026. So it's definitely been in development hell, but maybe it'll turn out good. The thing that I think is most wacky about the reboot to the Fable series is that the development team that Microsoft picked from their arsenal of teams that they've acquired over the years is Playground Games. They're known for their work on the Forza Horizon series.
Which, mind you, those games are good, right?
Yeah, they are great. And I'm not saying that this team's incapable of making a Fable game, but I do have to think that it's an interesting choice to choose a team known for their racing game to make a open world RPG game. When this was announced that Playground Games was working on rebooting the Fable series, they were hiring 177 new employees for this upcoming game. So they were, trying to acquire talent that they didn't already have. The game is being developed in the Forza engine. I think visually speaking, the game is going to look great because Forza typically looks great, but there had been reports over the years. The reason that the game was in development hell was because the development studio doesn't have a lot of experience making RPGs. They can make a great world, especially because of all their experience with Forza, but the studio has like no experience making an open world RPG game. And those games are kind of complex. It's an interesting challenge because it is a brand new studio coming in to take the reins of a really popular series, or at least a series that once was really popular. The whole next Fable game is being made by the Forza Horizon studio in itself. That premise is goofy. I'm not trying to say anything about the game itself. I hope the game turns out great. That'd be a win for everyone. But you can't help but to not raise an eyebrow, right? It'd be like, oh, look, a new Fable game's coming by the Forza team. I don't know. Am I wrong in this? Am I being too negative? I gotta be careful about how I word things now. I feel like sometimes people think that like, I don't know, I'm just like super negative towards every single thing we talk about. But sometimes I just want to talk about things that are a little goofy. I don't know.
I mean, sometimes we talk about bad games a lot too, so I don't know.
It's true. I guess, yeah, maybe they just all get lumped together even if the game's not bad.
I think we should stay on Microsoft because there's another game that we have on this list. Another series that used to be popular was Perfect Dark.
Oh, dude, don't get me started. I've talked about Perfect Dark so many times.
Do
you want to take the reins about it? Because I've talked about it to death.
We have talked about it a lot. I mean, Perfect Dark, the original games were developed by Rare, beloved studio. And then at some point, I don't know, do you need a year when they acquired Rare?
2003 is my guess. Maybe 2002. I think it was 2003.
Around this number that's on the screen right now, Microsoft acquired them, and then they kind of didn't do much. They developed some Kinect games and stuff, They really didn't do anything.
They got to do like one or two games. They got to do the Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, a little game like Cameo here, and then they got put on Kinect duty for a long time.
Since then, the Perfect Dark franchise has laid dormant, and then in 2020, it was announced that they're gonna be rebooting the Perfect Dark series, and they formed a new studio for it, a first-party Microsoft studio called The Initiative. We saw this like teaser. She was in this Middle Eastern city, futuristic. You saw Joanna Dark at the end. Is that her name? I think so, right?
Yeah.
And then that's kind of it. And then there was radio silence for a long time. Besides like news articles and reports by Jason Schreier and people like that talking about this game is in development hell.
Can I go on a quick rant?
Yeah, sure.
Just to be clear, I'm a huge Perfect Dark fan. I loved that game as a kid on the N64. Perfect Dark Zero for the Xbox 360. But I've played it. I've played through it. It's an experience of all time. The aesthetic's neat. But Perfect Dark, this Initiative reboot, has been absolutely insane. Luke did a great job covering the main points of it, but like there's some goofiness afoot there. First of all, Luke said this. They made a whole studio just to reboot Perfect Dark, which great. We've seen Microsoft do this before with interesting results. 343 Industries with Halo, the Coalition with Gears of War, and the Initiative could have been this third pillar for Perfect Dark, or better or worse. I don't even know what that would mean. A third pillar of Microsoft taking over an IP to do something with it. After they had already revealed the games in works, they had so much of their staff leave during this development hell period, like a massive exodus of developers just leaving the studio. Crystal Dynamics was brought in, but Crystal Dynamics was brought in because the lead working on Perfect Dark had formerly worked with Crystal Dynamics on the Tomb Raider reboot, because Microsoft spent millions and millions of dollars hiring top industry veterans to reboot this franchise and make this studio. After he got his old team back so that they could work on Perfect Dark, he quit and left the studio. So this marriage, this Avengers level team fell apart before anything even started. Now the game's been in development hell for a long time. They didn't even show it off at the last Xbox showcase.
But we did see some gameplay more recently, right?
But a while back, right? 6 months, a year ago. And then when they did show off that gameplay on their website, because I'm, as a big Perfect Dark fan, looked into it, realized they already emphasized that there's no co-op in the game. So another game that Microsoft came and just was no co-op. It's frustrating to me. Perfect Dark and co-op go together the same way you would expect co-op in Halo to be, but no co-op. So I'm a little bitter already about Perfect Dark just because of that alone. It definitely feels like a lot of personality from what we've seen. There's already a dissonance. It doesn't feel like Perfect Dark. It feels like a different game that they can be oh yeah, but it is Perfect Dark. The character names are the same and maybe some of the plot elements. It doesn't feel like this sci-fi spy cyberpunky experience that the first Perfect Dark was. And I still stand by that. Maybe the aliens will really play a bigger role and it'll be really cool, but I don't know. I just feel like Perfect Dark, it's not that complicated to follow a certain formula to make a good Perfect Dark game. Perfect Dark wasn't really that complex of a story or series, and just from what we've seen, which is very limited, it seems like they're just missing all of the things that made the first Perfect Dark interesting. I have a feeling I'm not gonna like it. I hope that's not the case. I really hope I end up just being really hyped and impressed, and that maybe, they really dig into the universe that made the first Perfect Dark good and do something with it. But I have a feeling that this is gonna feel even less like a Perfect Dark game than Perfect Dark Zero, which already was pretty derivative at its time. And that was the same team that made that one. Sorry, rant over.
Plus also, we don't know the release date for Perfect Dark at all yet. At least for Fable, we're oh, it's coming 2026.
Maybe, if it doesn't get delayed again.
Well, yeah, sure. But right now they said it's coming 2026, where Perfect Dark, I don't know, it could be another 2, 3, 4, 5 years. We don't know. Which is insane for a game that was announced in 2020.
Right. And it was allegedly even starting development earlier than that, maybe 2018. There was talks about it. So we're up there in years.
The next Duke Nukem, dude.
Didn't a game pass Duke Nukem recently? Oh, Beyond Good and Evil 2.
It can't pass Duke Nukem if it doesn't release, because Duke Nukem Forever at least did release. So
this summer, depending on when you're watching this video, Mafia: The Old Country is set to release, and this is the 4th entry in the Mafia series of games. However, the history behind the development in this game series is kind of all over the place in one of the more unique and weird ways. So let's look at the timeline here. The first Mafia game was developed by Illusion Softworks. The game was a pretty big success when it released all the way back in 2002. Somehow, my brother and I rented this game from Blockbuster when it came out. We were definitely too young to play it, but we played it. I remember that one level where you had to chase the guy with the car. It was way too difficult for me as a kid. After the success of the first Mafia game, Take-Two Interactive swooped in and announced that they had acquired Illusion Softworks for an undisclosed sum. Some of the developers who had worked on Mafia 1 and were at Illusion Softworks ended up actually leaving a studio, and they did a whole separate studio and did separate games, but there was still a team there, and they acquired that team, and eventually they would work on Mafia 2 under the brand new name of 2K Sheck. But this is where things get a little bit weird, because after the release of Mafia 2, 2K Sheck did some layoffs. 40 employees got laid off here. They were losing more employees. There was 200 employees at one point, but then that was getting cut down. And while Mafia 3 development was supposed to be beginning, allegedly the project ended up getting rebooted 7 times during the period of 2011 to 2013, which is a lot of times for a project to be stopped and restarted. So in 2014, 2K announced that they were going to be closing down 2K Sheck's Prague office. Some of those employees would end up getting moved to a different 2K office, and some of the other employees would be moved to different studios. However, there still was another team that wasn't in the Prague office that stayed around under the name of 2K Czech. However, during this whole process, 2K started up a brand new development studio called Hangar 13. And this new studio would go on to make Mafia 3. The old team, 2K Czech, would still... Is it Czech or Czech?
Czech. I think it's Czech.
Czech.
I think so.
Czech. I'll just say it correctly from here on. But the old team, 2K Czech, would then go on and be the support studio for their game series that they essentially had first worked on for this new studio that was taking over, and Mafia 3 would eventually release. However, Hangar 13 did see some pretty big layoffs after Mafia 3 released. Then they did the whole Mafia 1 Definitive Edition. They did the whole re-release of Mafia 2, then the Mafia Trilogy thing. And now Mafia 4, or Mafia the Old Country, is in fact developed by Hangar 13 again, making it their second new game, even though the remake was like a from the ground up type remake, which is an accomplishment of a game in itself. But I don't know if 2K Czech is still involved or around in any way. I know 2K still is. It's interesting how the game did get passed on to a new team, but still some of the old team worked on it, which isn't something you see very often in like a big shift of hands like this. Hey Luke, do you remember that game Rumbleverse?
Yes, I do. We just got a comment about it earlier.
Yeah, one guy in our comment section really loved Rumbleverse, which we played like 2 games of it. It was goofy. I don't know. It's a shame it's shut down. I don't think games should be shut down where you can't play them at all, even if the game's not that great. But the studio that made that is known as Iron Galaxy Studios. They're a developer based in Chicago, but they also have offices in Orlando and Nashville. Did you know that, Luke?
No, I did not know they had offices in Orlando and Nashville.
Their Wikipedia page says that they're most known for its lead development of Rumbleverse and Killer Instinct 2013 Seasons 2 and 3.
I think they made the port of that Borderlands collection that we bought.
Oh, really?
The Handsome Collection or whatever.
Oh, yeah. Look at this. They've done a ton of ports. They were the team that ported Overwatch to the Nintendo Switch and Apex Legends.
Oh.
Yeah.
Not Overwatch 2 on the Switch.
They worked on Metroid Prime Remastered. They worked on the Windows version of Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2 in 2023. Man, there's a long list of games that they've worked on as like a support studio. Not a lot of original work. However, they landed a contract deal with Activision for Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 and 4, which is probably the soonest game releasing on this list. If you're watching this video a little bit after this video came out, it's out already, depending on what week you watch this video. And this one's interesting to me because Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2 was a remake of the first 2 games originally made by Vicarious Visions. It was pretty well received, and apparently work on 3 and 4 had already maybe started or was planned, but then they had to like shift the team over to work on some other projects, and the project got scrapped altogether. And the original team that worked on Tony Hawk, Neversoft, isn't even really around anymore. They're not around at all, right?
They merged with Infinity Ward.
Yeah, fate worse than death. So now, Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 and 4, the idea lives on. Iron Galaxy will be the team doing the development instead. I'm curious how this turns out. If they follow the formula that 1 and 2 did, it shouldn't be that hard to make it competent and a good port, I would hope. However, it'll be interesting to see that in the launch period of the game, if there's like some catastrophic failure or something that makes this really bad. I hope not. I like the Tony Hawk games.
Trailer looks good.
Trailers lie, right?
I mean,
but
that's true,
hopefully, how hard can this be? Like 1 and 2 was already done. They just have to literally make the content for 3 and 4. And maybe that's why they picked a team that's known for porting and doing all that other stuff. Because really, they're just trying to like recreate some stuff. I don't know. I'm trying to look into the studio a little more. The only thing I can see is that in February of this year, they announced they're laying off 66 developers and support staff as a means of last resort for the company to stay afloat. I don't know if that's like the most reassuring thing. Like they're trying to do some desperation Hail Mary plays and somehow they landed this Activision contract for Tony Hawk.
Hey, but maybe they really need this. You know, they're going to try really hard.
This will bring them back and they'll start working on Rumbleverse too. They must have had so much money put into Rumbleverse that when that shut down, that almost bankrupted the company. It has to be because look, like if you look at their history, after Rumbleverse got shut down, like the CEO or the co-CEO stepped down and then all these layoffs happened. I actually am surprised Activision got a third-party studio to do this with how many studios Activision has, how many studios Microsoft has, that they chose to do the porting studio, but maybe it was cheaper. I mean, if they're desperate, they probably got a good deal to hire this team to do it. Did you know Rumbleverse was nominated for Online Game of the Year?
Where?
At the 26th Annual DICE Awards.
The DICE Award, right? What the hell?
And also Fighting Game of the Year. I don't think it won, but it was nominated. Was Rumbleverse secretly really good and we just didn't understand fighting games? It couldn't have been that good, right? We played it.
Here's what it went up against. The Final Fantasy 14 DLC, Endwalker, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, FIFA 23, Marvel Snap, and Rumbleverse.
Okay, hold on. Marvel Snap, Modern Warfare 2, and Final Fantasy all are substantially better quality than Rumbleverse, though.
I mean, even FIFA, arguably, honestly, but...
Right, okay. So what won? Final Fantasy?
Yeah, Final Fantasy. Which probably is the best on this list.
How did Rumbleverse get nominated? Wait, hold on. We need to throw this whole awards system out. The DICE Awards need to be banned. Halo Infinite won Best Online Game of the Year in 2021.
What the hell?
How? I mean, I guess it was up against Call of Duty Vanguard. Okay, we're getting off track. On the topic of skateboarding, Skate is actually one that I'm really excited for. I really, really hope it's good. I don't know if it will be. It's a different team made from the ground up to bring Skate back to life as a live service game. From what they've shown off, it looks promising. Obviously, this is going to be different from like Skate 1, 2, and 3, as this game will be an online live service game. I think you have to connect online to even play the game, which isn't really a popular decision to make. It's going to be microtransactions in the game, but it will be free to play on consoles, PC, and mobile, so that'll be interesting. If they can just provide the same level of content Skate 3 had in 2010 as the base game and then add content on top of that, slam dunk. As long as the gameplay feels tight, it shouldn't be, a game that's that hard to mess up, but you never know. It's been taking a while for this game to come out, but also, I guess, it's a brand new team. It's not the original team that made the Skate trilogy, so having to recreate how the game felt back in the day could be challenging. I'm optimistic about this one. I think playtesting actually starts this summer, so we will get to at least feel it out soon.
We signed up for that, right?
I did sign up for the pre-alpha, whatever, early access thing. I think I got in, but I don't know when I get to play it. Hopefully soon. We'll play it when it comes out, or when we are allowed to play it. Are we allowed to say that? I don't know if I don't think I signed an NDA yet.
Did you actually know that they announced Skate before they had the studio established?
They did some weird stuff. I think they already had picked one or two execs who were going to start the studio and announced it then. But yeah, no, it's been a long, long time. But I mean, there was that whole make EA Skate again slogan people were throwing around way back then. People have wanted Skate to come back. Skate 3 has consistently done well for essentially an abandoned game. It still has a pretty decent player base. It's a shame Skate 2 is offline, because I would play Skate 2. I liked Skate 2 a little more than Skate 3, but Skate 3 is still a pretty good game. I still go back to it every once in a while. There's obviously a lot of other games that have fallen into this system that we've seen here. We're not going to be able to get to every single one, but some honorable mentions. Dead Island. There was a whole lot of switching hands there before Dead Island 2 eventually did come out. And obviously Star Wars Battlefront, the two games from back in the day, and then the revived Star Wars Battlefront games from a few years ago, which Star Wars Battlefront 2 is still doing pretty well. I think it has a pretty active player base nowadays, which is a wild story in itself. We've also talked a lot about Pokemon Diamond and Pearl and the remakes done by Ilka, which hadn't ever done a main game before, and all of a sudden they were throwing a major Pokemon release. I think that company ended up kind of becoming a new Pokemon-based development studio that's going to continue to work on Pokemon projects. I think they have that new Switch 2 mobile Pokemon game that they're working on. Yeah, we just had to talk about Ilka. They have to get in the video somewhere, because those Diamond and Pearl remakes were something else, that's for sure.
Now, another interesting one is what happened with the Guitar Hero series. So Harmonix developed a couple of Guitar Hero games in the mid-2000s, and then by 2007, Harmonix was acquired by MTV Games, and they choose to develop their own game called Rock Band, since Activision had the rights to Guitar Hero at the time. And then Activision assigned Neversoft to make Guitar Hero from then on. And after that kind of fell off, and, Guitar Hero kind of, wasn't as popular anymore. They did try one more time with a different studio, which was Freestyle Games, which actually is now a Ubisoft studio. So kind of an interesting connection there. So Guitar Hero switched 3 times as well. Oh, and Harmonix nowadays obviously is also on Fortnite or under Epic Games. They obviously, MTV Games is not, I assume, is not a company that is open anymore. That would be crazy.
Is MTV still open?
Yeah, that's another good question. I don't know. Also, Mortal Kombat had a different developer in the 90s that eventually filed for bankruptcy in the late 2000s, and then the IP transferred over to a new studio called NetherRealm Studios, and they've been making Mortal Kombat games ever since to pretty good success, actually. I mean, they kind of rebooted the series. I mean, I think Mortal Kombat is still pretty popular nowadays. Maybe not as popular as it was in the late 90s, because that was some crazy stuff, but Yeah, still pretty decent games. Another interesting one is The Wolf Among Us 2. When Telltale closed in 2018, Wolf Among Us 2 had already been announced, but it was cancelled, obviously, with the closure. Now, the rights to all the Telltale stuff was eventually bought by a company called LCG Entertainment, and they just reopened a studio called also Telltale Games, but it's technically a new studio just with the same name, and they're gonna develop The Wolf Among Us 2. They're gonna co-develop it actually with Ad Hoc Studio, which is a studio made of former Telltale staff, like the original Telltale staff. So that's gonna be pretty interesting to see. It's another studio change, I guess.
So another one that like kind of counts, but also like a little asterisk by it because still like the same team name, some of the same team members, but it's completely owned by a different company, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, on paper they're a different company.
I think Baldur's Gate 3 is a notable one to mention because the game actually ended up being good. BioWare did the first two Baldur's Gate, but then they didn't do anything with Baldur's Gate for a pretty long time. Wizards of the Coast ended up wanting a revival and ended up working with Larian, who was known for doing the Divinity Original Sin games, which people were already like, man, this game kind of feels like a cool version of Baldur's Gate. And it was like a perfect match. And then boom. Baldur's Gate 3 was a huge success. The end.
So in 2019, they also announced a new Bioshock game that was going to be made by a completely new studio called Cloud Chamber, since most of the original team had moved on and they're working on a game called Judas, I think. I don't know. Remember that they announced it at the Game Awards a couple of years ago. We don't know much about this new Bioshock game. We don't know where it's going to be set, if it's a reboot or anything, I think. We just know they're working on it and eventually it'll come out. Maybe, but it's a different studio. And also during that research, I learned that Bioshock 2 was also made by a different studio. But then for Bioshock Infinite, it was the original people. After the first one, they wanted to make Bioshock Infinite, but 2K was like, we need more Bioshock games in the underwater city, which I didn't know before.
Did you want to talk about Mass Effect Andromeda? I mean, we should probably talk about Mass Effect Andromeda.
Who really wants to talk about Mass Effect Andromeda, dude?
The original trilogy was spearheaded by BioWare's Edmonton studio. However, Mass Effect Andromeda was handled by a new team out of Montreal. So instead of getting the Canadians to work on this one, they got the French to work on it.
You do know Montreal is in Canada too, right?
Wait, is it? Why do you always say Ubisoft Montreal is a bunch of French people? We're not beating the allegations that we don't do research on our videos. We do research on our videos. We just don't research where the offices are located of a development team. And we don't research geography, apparently, either.
We should be playing GeoGuessr to learn more.
We really should.
Another interesting one, and this one is another development hell mess. Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 was announced in 2019, and the studio that was supposed to lead development on this was Heartsuit Labs, which are a very small studio, but they were not involved in the original Vampire the Masquerade games either. So then years go by, and the publisher decides they're not doing a good enough job. So in 2023, they got replaced by another different studio called The Chinese Room, which now are taking over the development, or which have been taking over the development since then. And they are known for like Dear Asta or Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. They're taking over this new Vampire the Masquerade game. It's gonna come out allegedly this year. So after 6 years and 2 studios, this game is also gonna come out.
I do think it's interesting how much we're seeing different development teams brought in to do remasters or remakes of different games. We don't need to talk about all of them because there's so many games that are remade by a different studio or remastered by a different studio. We could do like some quick honorable mentions. Gothic is actually getting a remake from the ground up with a brand new development team. Alchema Interactive. So yeah, they're working on Gothic. We just had Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, which was a remaster. That was developed by Virtuos, and they've done a lot of games.
They have 25 studios themselves.
Yeah, that's insane. System Shock, I think, just got a remake. The remake from a couple years ago was done by Night Dive Studios. Interestingly enough, the team Night Dive Studios has a ton of history releasing content for games, remastered, enhanced versions, re-releases. They did like the Doom 64 re-release recently. They did the System Shock 2 25th anniversary remaster. That's what they just put out this year. Star Wars Dark Forces, you can get that on Xbox now, and I think PC also. They were in charge of like, reformatting the game to work on modern systems. They did a ton. They did Quake in 2021, Turok, the more recent re-releases of those from like 2015, 2017. So yeah, they have a lot of examples. That's literally their bread and butter.
Isn't it a Turok game that got announced?
Is there?
Yeah, Turok Origins is developed by Saber Interactive, which I think are a pretty big studio.
Oh yeah, Saber. They did the Halo Combat Evolved anniversary remaster back in the day. They've definitely worked more as like an assist studio. They've done a couple of original games now, but I think they did most of the development work on Halo Anniversary. 343 wasn't like doing much. They were just managing them, mostly working on Halo 4 at the time. So Interesting. Also, Motive Studio. I don't know if this one counts because it's an EA developer studio. They just are one of the few EA studios that have their own names, but they did the Dead Space remaster or remake in 2023. I think it should count, even though the original Dead Space was developed by EA Redwood Shores. So it's still EA, but EA has so many teams. I didn't know if it counted, so we're just putting it here on this like little remake section of the video. So what do you guys think? Did you enjoy this video? Are we wrong about something? Did we miss a game that you think we had to talk about and we let you down by not talking about it? Leave it in the comments down below. Also, huge thank you to our patrons, our YouTube members making these long videos possible. If you want to become one of them and help our videos, you could do that. Also, check out the video on your screen. YouTube thinks you might like it. There's like a whole algorithm that figures that stuff out. So maybe watch that. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe to more videos and we'll see you next time with a new video. Bye.